Bonjour, hello. I'm David Bradford, Associate Coordinator, Programming and Coordination here at the Blue Metropolis International Literary Festival. I'd like to welcome you to today's event, which is a little different for us at the festival, an event about elders, traditions, mentors, and their influences on the practices of food culture professionals across the country. We have a number of people that are local for the festival, and then we have another person coming in to us from out west. Before I get started though, I'd like to take a little moment just to acknowledge that most of us here today, certainly myself, are coming to you from Chartrand, also known as Montreal, on the unceded territory of the Quebec Nation, something that the festival and surely myself want to not only acknowledge, but also kind of critically engage in our work with programming, with the literary community here in town, across the country, internationally, which includes today's event. A big part of what brought us to the conversation today is a Blue Met initiative connected to this conversation around influences, a Canadian heritage supported project called The Secret is in the Sauce. It's a project that brings together the stories of immigrants and Indigenous, mostly elderly cooks, and their recipes, giving folks a view into their own home cook practices, traditions, cultural, family-based, and otherwise. They have kind of influenced their own way of doing things in the house, around cooking, around cuisine. It's also a project that was led by Monique Pollack, who is your host today, who's done a beautiful job of bringing those stories and recipes together, all of which are currently on our blog, on our website, and we will make sure that there is a link in the description below for you to check that out. I'm gonna hand things over to Monique, who I'll only say is a good friend of the festival, has done a number of things for us this year, and is a bit of a force to be reckoned with sometimes, and certainly has been the driving force behind this Secret is in the Sauce project. Thanks so much for doing this, Monique. Welcome. I hope everybody enjoys the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, David, for getting things started. I felt a little bit today like before a dinner party that I knew would be an amazing party because I know I had a chance to talk to all of the panelists beforehand. So I was already like that pleasure of anticipating the fine company. And even easier, I didn't have to make you guys supper because it's a pandemic. So we can just have a wonderful conversation. So I want to begin by introducing everybody. And last week I was lying in bed planning, thinking, as I was falling asleep. And I was thinking, okay, what's the order going to be? It's alphabetical. And I'm not the greatest with the alphabet, but I quickly realized not only are they all C's, they're all CH's. And they have another thing in common, which I thought I would mention. I'm sure our listeners will be very impressed. They have all been on Iron Chef America.
Canada.
Oh, thank you. I said correct me. Just so that you all know, I've told the panelists, just call out any corrections. Iron Chef Canada, shame on me. But anyway, North America, good enough. And we're very, very proud and excited to get to have this conversation. Okay, so in order, alphabetical order, I don't see Shane's picture. Shane, are you there with us? Can I see, do you guys see his picture? Okay, good.
Yeah,
maybe
I see him.
Press a different button. I won't worry. Okay, so I want to begin by introducing you to Shane M Chartron. He is the author of a book, of a recently released fabulous cookbook called Wow, Progressive Indigenous Cuisine. And it's co-authored with Jennifer Cockrell King, and it's published by the House of Anansi Press. And he grew up on a farm near Red Deer, Alberta, and he's now a chef. He's quite modest because I asked him permission to boast about him, but he said, nah, just call me a chef, not a fancy chef. Okay, between you and me, he's a fancy chef. In Enoch, Alberta, he is Plains Cree, his dad is Métis, his mom is Mi'kmaq. The things he told me in our little pre-interview, he's had me like thinking differently about a lot of stuff and not just food, since I had a chance to to talk to him. So you're going to love him. Okay, then next in alphabetical order, Lesley Chesterman, who is a real, everybody in Montreal, of course, we all know, we all love Lesley Chesterman. She's a food journalist. She was a longtime restaurant critic for the Montreal Gazette. And she also is a food journalist for Ici Première. And her cookbook, which I happen to have in my hands, Shane's is on its way to me, is called Chez Lesley, Mes secrets pour tout réussir en cuisine. And it's published by Cardinal. And it is a gorgeous book. And Lesley's really locally, she's our authority on everyone wants to know what she's up to, what she's cooking, what she's eating, and what she thinks about food. And the last person, the last CH in alphabetical order, is Jonathan Cheung. And Cheung, I got it. He gave me the sign, good. And he is the owner of Appetite for Books, which is the cookbook, well, our cookbook store in Montreal, the place to go not only to buy wonderful cookbooks, but to take cooking lessons and every kind of cooking lesson you can imagine. Also, he grew up in the restaurant business in Vancouver, and he's lived in Hong Kong, and we'll hear more about his life and his journey and how he ended up being the owner of Appetite for Books, and it's not something that he expected. So I guess I'll get started. I'll just ask questions, but like my style, if it was a dinner party, hop in if you want to. You know, I can keep it going. I have a lot of questions. I thought it would be a nice beginning if Shane would tell us, and I have a reason for it because I know the answer to my question. His book is called Tawao, and it's Progressive Indigenous Cuisine. Shane, can you tell us about Tawao, what the word means, and maybe we'll see why it's such a great beginning for our talk today. Are you there, Shane? I'm not hearing him.
Oh, I think he's on mute.
Shane, we need you to,
Okay,
otherwise I can do it.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Perfect. So Tanse Oki, Tawao means, the word Tawao means welcome, come in, there's room.
Oh.
Yeah.
I love that. So that's it. There's room. Thank you. So thanks for getting me started then. I thought I'd ask everybody for an early memory about food, and it could be different for everyone. Like nothing, maybe I'll start with Lesley. What's your first memory cooking, food, pleasure?
Well, mine is quite interesting because my great-grandmother was a wheat farmer in Saskatchewan. My great-grandparents on my mother's side were farmers in Saskatchewan, and their heritage was Ukrainian and Polish. So my great-grandmother lived in a small town called Kenora, Saskatchewan, where a lot of Ukrainians came at the turn of the century, and they were given plots of land by the Canadian government that were really like the most wild plots of land that they had to turn into farmland, which they did. So if you're looking at most of the wheat farmers in Canada, especially at that time, we're talking about Ukrainian and Polish settlers who came in when really they had nothing left for them in their own country, and they owed everything to Canada. So when I was young, we would go and visit my great-grandmother. My grandmother lived in Winnipeg, so we could see my great-grandmother in Saskatchewan. And we'd always sit in the kitchen, and they all spoke Ukrainian, so I had no idea what they were talking about. And I think they did it on purpose, so we wouldn't know what they were talking about. And I remember my great-grandmother, who was a very little lady, we called her Baba. All I remember about her was all she ever did was cook. And she would stand at this counter in a very small kitchen, and all she would do is cook and hand people food. And we always have an expression in my family, which is I'll have a wing in the kitchen, because my great-grandmother had 14 children, but when it came time to eat dinner, she'd always say, I'll have a wing in the kitchen. So she cooked for everybody else, but she was so modest that she took the smallest part of the chicken for herself. But my first memory was going into her bedroom and sitting on the bed and feeling something in the bed. And I pulled back the homemade quilt because everything in their lives was homemade. And there was a huge bowl of dough rising because, of course, she made all her own bread. And she would always put her bread to rise underneath the blankets in her very own bed. So I think she actually had flour in her sheets, you know. I know a baker who's always telling me about flour on his shoes. Bakers always have flour on their shoes, but my great grandmother that had dough in her bed, literally in her bed. And it was a bowl this big, huge bowl. And it was right there. And that it really stuck with me all my life.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Jonathan, could you tell us about changing it up a bit from a memory to a recipe failure? Because it's kind of fun for people to hear.
Well, we were talking about the first food memories that you had. The first food memory I have of cooking is I can't remember how old I was. I'm gonna say I was probably 6 or 7 at my cousin's cottage in Whistler. I was staying there for the weekend, and I woke up one morning inspired to make scrambled eggs. And like I said, I was 7 years old, and I figured, hey, how hard can this be? I've eaten, my grandmother used to make it for me all the time. So what, I think I could probably do it. So I cracked an egg into a bowl, and I think I remember my grandmother saying that you have to put milk in the egg. So I think I added probably triple the amount of milk into the one egg, and I had put a pan on the stove. And this is before my aunt and uncle woke up. So I remember putting the pan on the stove and ready to cook it when my aunt came running into the kitchen and be like, "What are you doing?" As a 7-year-old trying to turn on the stove and make scrambled eggs for breakfast at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then she helped me fix it and helped me and showed me how to cook scrambled eggs. So that was my first major failure. I'm lucky, like, it would have been even more of a failure if I actually got the milk mixture with a little bit of egg into the pan. But I think that was probably the kickoff to
your
a
career.
culinary career. We all got to make mistakes, right?
And that's one of the themes today. And also how one story leads to another story. And I know I'm not part of the panel, but I will permit myself just a super fast one, egg related, which I told Jonathan, which was that I wanted to impress my dad. I made a meatloaf, and the recipe was from some magazine, and it said boil eggs and put them in a row in the meatloaf, which I did, but it never said peel the eggs. So it was a bit of a problem.
My God.
Shane, I have a particular memory I would love Shane to share. And how about if I just give you one little word, Shane, the Bonanza restaurant. Could you tell us that story?
About which story again?
The Bonanza restaurant. Bonanza restaurant.
Banana restaurant?
Yeah, because, okay, so hold on. Maybe I don't ask it to you that way. So tell us about your growing up and what food meant. And Shane comes from a very, it has a tough story and a beautiful, meaningful story. And Bonanza, not to bug you too much about it, but you saw some people eating dinner at Bonanza restaurant.
Oh, yeah. So it was more of an inspiration, and that wasn't the biggest inspiration of why I started cooking, but it was certainly one, because the thing is, I didn't realize, when we talk on the phone, food is us, food is medicine, food is life, food is love, all this stuff, because this morning I got up, made a really nice breakfast, had a great cup of coffee, had a little bit of whatever else, drinking some fresh cold water. Life is good. It's a good start of a day. I went to this restaurant trying to figure out, why I love food. Why, I do love cooking. I loved cooking back then. But then I saw this couple sitting there, a couple of two. They're on a date, or they've already been together. But the fact is, they were having a great time. They had a bottle of wine in front of them. They had snacks. They had appetizers, and they were laughing, and they were in love, and they were eating. And I went to the table and they didn't even order anything. They just said, bring us whatever you want to bring us. And the whole idea of emotion and understanding, I just affected a couple and made their day. Now, if I made bad food, it wouldn't have been quite as good. Obviously, would have taken care of the food. The maitre d' would have came by, blah, blah, blah. But that's still, that never happened. And just watching how happy they were just really invigorated the whole idea of I can affect people with my food. And it's exciting to watch people sit there and enjoying and loving. They made the choice to come to my restaurant too. Let's say that. They got in their vehicle, picked the restaurant, made the choice, had a great time. That's a memory.
That's great. And can you tell us a bit about food in your family growing up, what it meant? And like I said,
food in my family growing up was very farm-esque food because I grew up on a farm. But obviously, that farm life is long gone. But my family's obviously moved on. We had to sell the acreage. But yeah, growing up was very simple food. I mean, we just have meatloaf, we have spaghetti, we have borscht. I remember one time for dinner we had tea and toast. You get tea, toast, dip it in, eat it. That was our dinner.
wow.
It's all easy stuff, fun, roast beef, easy. Wasn't complicated. It wasn't like this like Indigenous food I do now. It's nothing like we did. At the same time, we did a lot of hunting. We had a lot of deer, moose, ducks, geese. Our freezer was full. So we did have wild game kicking around, but mostly it was quite just basic comfort family food.
Right. I realized that when I did the intro to you, Shane, I forgot something very important, that he has a cat named Gravy. Your cat
I
is...
do, yeah, he's kicking around here somewhere.
Anyway, I thought that was pretty cool. So I thought maybe now we could talk a little bit, a touch in the family, like, so growing up with food, was there anybody, like anyone who was an influence? So we don't have to, everyone doesn't have to answer, but maybe if you have somebody you might want to say. Lesley, you already told us about your baba. What about, is there anybody, maybe in this case, you want to talk about a book or because, you know, you're a cookbook author. Was
Right.
there a book that was the big influence?
Well, I think a huge influence when I was young, because it really was of my generation, was watching PBS cooking shows. So I really did spend a lot of time in my basement watching Julia Child, watching the urban, nope, not so much the urban peasant, the frugal gourmet. That was really back in the time. Walk with Yan. I mean, these were shows that were instrumental to what the heck is going on. And it was a food that was quite different than what we were eating at home, because you have to realize that 70s, when I was a child in the 70s and in the 80s, our food was very, very different. I mean, the selection of lettuce that we had at the supermarket was not at all what it is today. The quality of meat, a million things. We ate very simply. And I often had pancakes for dinner when I was little. When my mother, who worked hard, when she came home, if there wasn't time, she'd make pancakes. She was a very good cook. But if I wanted to see something above and beyond what was happening in my home kitchen or my great grandmother's kitchen, although we never ate Ukrainian food in my house, that was really at my grandmother's house, I would turn on the TV and I would go all over the world with, Julia Child, who was not French, who was making very French food. People, there were Italian people too. I mean, the Italian shows, I'm trying to remember what they were, because there was a woman who was a little bit heavyset, who was fantastic, who made Italian food. So I was seeing the world through these cooking shows and the possibilities. I mean, just watching, I think I'd skip school to watch Walk with Yan because he was so entertaining. And I mean, I made my mother buy me a wok and like all the ingredients, and then they sat there forever because I wasn't sure what I was making, if it tasted right. Like it's easy to go home and try to be, Yan, but it doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. So that was a long road to figuring out how I could cook like they cooked, and how I could open the world to myself through my palate. And I still do today. And this was a very exotic adventure for a young Anglo girl in French Montreal. Right. And so TV was huge, even more so than cookbooks, because even cookbooks, there was not a lot out there, but I will say Gourmet magazine was always in my house. I've kept them all to this day. But then again, Gourmet magazine was about travel, was about getting out of your regular bubble, your life. It was about seeing the world through food.
And Jonathan, you grew up in a cooking family, right? In a restaurant family. Can you tell us a bit about what that was like? Because that's very different from your co-panelists.
Yeah, I was just listening to the stories, and my upbringing is very different, and that's what makes this so interesting. I wouldn't say that I was brought up in a cooking family. I was brought up in a restaurant family.
Okay.
Since I was born, my dad has always been in the restaurant business, in the restaurant industry. In fact, my father started off his restaurant career at McDonald's, at the very first McDonald's in Canada, which is in Richmond, which is a suburb outside Vancouver. The first McDonald's to open in Canada was there, and he was the first Asian person to work at the first McDonald's in Canada, which I find pretty interesting. Also, he was the first Asian manager of a McDonald's in Canada. So that's pretty cool. But he did not cook, and my mom didn't really cook that much. I think she cooked out of necessity. My mother was brought up by, her parents were born and raised in Vancouver. They're of like British ancestry. So I think my great-grandparents or great-great-grandparents were from the UK, but my grandparents were born and raised in Vancouver, as was my mother. So that style of cooking on my mother's side of the family was not super interesting. I'm gonna be honest with you. I do remember going for Christmas dinner at my grandparents' place, and we had turkey and all the traditional stuff. There are pluses and minuses. There's like the turkey was really great, but the tomato aspic and the Jello salad, not so much. So I was brought up with that. But on the other side, my father, Chinese, born in Hong Kong. They moved to Canada in the very early 60s, and along with a huge population of Chinese immigrants that came from Hong Kong into Vancouver. So I was brought up more so with Asian food. I remember going to my grandmother's house every Sunday night as a child. Every Sunday, the whole family would go. All my aunts and uncles and my brother my dad had 5 sisters and a brother. So we had a pretty large family. I had 14 cousins. So we would all go to my grandmother's house every Sunday. And if anybody got me into cooking, it was probably my dad's mother, Ruby Cheung. She had a really interesting history when it came to food. She was actually born in India, in Calcutta, because her parents, her father was a carpenter there, and they lived there. She was brought up there. And in fact, her first 2 children were born in India. But then with the Indochina War, they moved and fled to Hong Kong with nothing. And they lived in Hong Kong. My grandmother gave birth to, I think, 3 or 4 other daughters in Hong Kong. And then in the very early 60s, they made the leap to move to Vancouver because it was a much more how can I say, it could be a more prosperous lifestyle in Canada than in Hong Kong, and a little bit more space. So, especially with such a large family.
Right.
So my grandmother lived in the same house from when they moved to Vancouver to when she died. And I have very fond memories of going into the kitchen and the smells of my grandmother's cooking. So not only Chinese cooking, but also I think it was every Wednesday. Every Wednesday she would make curry and chapati and like Indian flatbreads, and they would everyone would go over if they wanted curry. Wednesday was the day you go over to Mama's house for curry. But then on Sunday night, we would all get together and have a big feast. Everyone would cook something, bring something. My grandmother would always make certain things that all the kids would like, because there's a lot of cousins. And I think she was probably the most influential in the cooking, besides the fact that I was brought up in the restaurant business, because whenever I used to go to my dad's restaurants, the kitchens were always the most exciting part. And that's where all the good smells and foods came from. So I always tend to gravitate towards the kitchen. And so like the inspirations were all over me, were all over the place surrounding me, except in my house where my mom didn't cook. She cooked, like I said, cooked out of necessity. My dad, it was funny. I was just talking to my dad the other day. He for Valentine's Day, he cooked dinner for his wife in Hong Kong, but they pretty much just got a whole bunch of takeout stuff from one of their restaurants, because they have a whole bunch of restaurants in Hong Kong. And he literally just opened a bag and warmed it up, and he called it cooking. So even to this day, I think he needs somebody to make him coffee.
That's funny. Shane, Shane, you were adopted by the Chartrons. I think you were 10 years old. Do you want to share any memories of life before then? He was like, bounced around a lot. He was part of the Scoop. I think, can you tell us a little about what food meant when you were in the system, what meals were, and then, or if you prefer, maybe tell us about how life changed with the Chartrons, because I know that was a big, important, happy change in your life. So either the before or the after or in between, whatever you're good with.
Well, the thing is, the 60s Scoop movement isn't something that's an easy conversation.
No.
So the thing, I was taken away when I was I was taken away when I was 3 years old. Actually, no, I think I was taken away when I was 2, but it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. And I was thrown into foster care. And then during foster care, I didn't get to eat a lot of food. And the reason being is the fact that a lot of the families didn't really care so much about us, because we were just going from one home to one home. Who knows? But I went through 10 homes, all through the city of Calgary, Alberta, not knowing anything. Matter of fact, I remember one time, and I don't want to make this sappy or anything. Trust me, there's going to be a positive on the end. Mm-hmm. I remember that one time I was left in a school because we sat on Santa's knee. We received a Christmas gift, and all the kids went home. Parents came over, picked up all their kids, and I was sitting there eating my candy. And the school got shut down, and I was stuck there for probably 2.5 hours. Pitch blackness in a school, because my social worker forgot about me. But I always know someone was always going to come, so I went through that for quite a long time. Yeah. Now, so when I got adopted, the reason why food meant so much to me is because I didn't know what it felt like sitting around a dinner table. Everybody, those are the essential years in your life, sitting around, getting to know your family, and knowing how to share and pass the fork, pass the potatoes, or whatever that looks like to people. When I was a kid, when I finally was adopted, I was not used to sitting at a dinner table around a family, a mom, dad, mushum, cushum, anyway, grandmother, grandfather. So the point is, you sit around a dinner table with a family, and I was never used to that. So it's uncomfortable for me. But the thing is, though, I was fed, and I was never fed in all those foster homes. I was very skinny. I was definitely not healthy, and nobody really cared, because I was 60 Scoop. He's just gonna go. He's a native kid, whatever. And I'm sure the social worker will come grab him and send him to another home, right? Because they have to rotate kids around. But anyway, when I got there, then I realized life on a farm, raising chickens, geese, having horses, gardening. We had a root cellar out there. We had a huge garden. So on Saturdays, when all the kids are having fun with their best friends, I'm the one picking weeds, around wasps and bees and all this kind of stuff. But the thing is, it was a real See, the thing is, I didn't realize at the time what I was learning. I realized that later on in life, what my family gave me. And it's understanding the fact that so this is what I learned when I went to the restaurant world. When people talk about farm to fork, nose to tail, I don't know, egg to plate, like you pick it. You pick the marketing ploy. It's all garbage. It was always there in the Indigenous in the Indigenous families. Are we all perfect in that world? No, because none of us are. But the thing was, that was all I knew. So when I went to the restaurant world, I'm seeing all these vegetables coming in. I'm assuming they're coming from farms. That's where my mind was. This is coming from farms. And then the fish start coming in. But my first restaurant was a truck stop, a very dirty kind of truck stoppy place. And I'm seeing all this processed food. I'm like, oh, wow, crazy. I've never seen this before. So here I'm eating deep fried chicken burgers and stuff because I've never had it before. My parents never brought me to McDonald's or fast food. We never ate that kind of ever. And I mean that. I don't say these things to make myself sound like I'm this guy that grew up in this perfect world. But the funny thing was, later on in life, when I got to the bigger restaurants, because I pushed myself to get out of that farm, went to small restaurants, worked on my sushi bars, worked on my family restaurants, worked all over the place, did my stages in Toronto, worked all over the place, all over Turtle Island, up north, all over. This is the thing. My food world changed because of my family, simply because they taught me the value of this land and the frequencies of this land and touchstones of information, the sustainability of not just the food. People talk about like food sustainability. What about the sustainability in us as people? And that's really important too. So then I realized when I was older, when I was in my 20s, people are talking all this, oh my God, farm to fork. It's going to be this long table dinner. A pig. I'm like, well, I don't get it. Like, isn't this just the way it is? Like, why is it got to be called farm to fork? Isn't it just called food? It's just call it what the event's called, So, and I certainly do not mean to hurt people's feelings by saying stuff like that, but it's the way I believe. It was the way I was raised. My dad used to come home frustrated because after he worked a long day, we'd have to go gardening or whatever. We had to work in the root cellar, or better yet, the sump tank in the back broke down. We had to go fix that. So pure farm life. I worked on a pig farm for a bit, and then I started jumping into restaurants. And the funny thing about that is, the first restaurant I worked at, I loved it, and it was garbage. When I mean it was such a garbage restaurant, when you walked into the restaurant, you had to turn the water on, and you had to leave it running for about 5 minutes before the black of water went away, before it became clear.
Wow.
That's how bad it was.
That's pretty bad.
Now, the thing was, though, regardless of how bad it was, that was my start. Then it got better, and it just kept all the way up. Now, this is the thing. In that restaurant I worked at, this kid said to me, or this guy a couple of years older than me said, why are you doing this? Like, why do you want to cook? I said, because I love it. He's like, but why? He's like, and not only do I love it, I'm going to be the best chef in the whole wide world. And he laughed at me. He's just like, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I said, okay, sure, you can laugh. I don't mind. The next restaurant after that I went to was a chain restaurant. My only chain restaurant I ever worked in was called Maxwell Taylor's. And I worked there, and I said the same thing. And someone said, I can't believe you like cooking. It's ridiculous. I said, well, I have to cook because I'm going to be the best chef in the whole wide world. And he laughed. So you got to realize I was ridiculed all the way through because all these people that were cooking didn't even want to cook. They were there just to make a paycheck. And then after that, they'd quit and go to the rigs anyway, because over here in Alberta, you're 19 years old making $35 an hour, and I'm making $8. Okay, wow. maybe not 35, but you get what I'm saying. Yeah. I persevered, and the reason I did was because I felt it was important in my life to celebrate what my family did and how they raised me. And when I got out of foster care from being a 60 scoop kid, the one thing my mom told me, and she still does say this, out of all my siblings, I was the only one that got up from the table and said, thank you.
Pretty important part of the meal. Being
Yeah,
grateful.
because they're used to it. They're used to getting food.
Exactly.
I wasn't. I got food, you know, not the best food ever. And I wasn't treated very well there. And so it was just very nice that they treated me well. They fed me well. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you this last thing. I accidentally, I made all kinds of mistakes trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And my mom called me I was very clumsy. I was very messy. You know, I couldn't tie my shoes on right. And then she said, all of a sudden, bam, he starts cooking. We couldn't believe how organized he was and how fast, how much he loved it. So back then, because we're all somewhat in the same age. We used to have those ticket wheels. You remember the ticket wheels in restaurants? Yeah. I actually don't remember how they work anymore, but that's how I started. So my first 2 restaurants had ticket wheels, and I just spin out, pull them off, cook, and yeah, my parents were very amazed. For me, I just knew it was my calling. I don't know how. There's a point where I went after I went to culinary school, then I had to stagiaire, then I had to work Italian restaurants, French restaurants, bistros. I did as much as I could. I went banquets, hotels. I loved a lot. I hated lots, but I enjoyed the journey. And that's why I ended up with the book like Tuau and my Indigenous world and celebrating that as a whole, because that is who I am. That is in my soul. Yeah. And I'll never do that until the day I expire.
And we're
Shane, I actually have a question. Shane, were your parents supportive of you getting into cooking or restaurant business?
Yeah, they were supportive of anything I wanted to do, but my mom didn't really care. But my dad said, if that's what you want to do, you better do it full and go all the way. So what happened was I finished my first and second year of culinary school, and then I dropped out because it was just like this is boring. And then my dad came to me, I don't know, maybe a couple months later and said, son, get back to school and finish it. You have to finish it. What is the point of you starting something? It doesn't make you look good. You've got to get that certificate. Everything you need certificates. Get this certificate and finish your culinary school and then go. And he pushed me. And then I, not only did he push me, and then he didn't even push me. That's all he said was just stop right there. And then I not only listened to him, but I crushed my last year of school. Matter of fact, it's funny that you asked me that, because last night I pulled out all my culinary marks. I thought I did a lot worse than I thought. My marks are really good, and I can tell you that I studied for my dad. I know I did. I don't remember doing it, but I'm sure I did because he told me to.
If you know what I was thinking, it might be fun if I could ask everybody a quick question, just to like make it like, so we move around a little bit more. Just like a very short answer. Okay, so and you made me actually, Shane, think of more questions. So I've been jotting things down madly. So here's one question: how do you each read a cookbook? Do you read from beginning to end, or do you just like open up a page and start reading? Shane, you're in the middle of my screen. What do you do?
I do not start from the beginning to the end. I always read the beginning first, though. Yeah. And then I kind of hop back and forth. Okay. Yeah.
Leslie, what do you do? What's your style of someone else's cookbook?
I reviewed cookbooks for so many years. So I used to get hundreds of them. So I couldn't really sit down and read them all. Right. So first of all, if I know the name of the person who wrote the cookbook, that will affect the way I approach a book, because not that you ever really know what they're going to do, but that I had expectations from who the author was. And in fact, when I wrote my cookbook, I thought of this. I thought, if I'm going to write a cookbook, how do I look at a cookbook? And I literally pick up a cookbook and I just open it up. And if I quickly see about 3 recipes that I really want to do, then they draw me in.
Okay.
So when I wrote my cookbook, I wanted to do a book that if somebody opened it 3 times, randomly, they would see 3 recipes that they would want to do. So
it's working for me, Leslie.
There has to be a draw, and for me, well, for that book, it had to be familiar things, because that was something that. But if you open an Ottolenghi book, you could open it up and be drawn in because it's unfamiliar, because it's colorful, or because you want to eat it. So I need like bang, 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 pull, and then you got me. But if I start cooking from the book and there are mistakes, you lost me.
Right,
Like,
okay.
I am the biggest proponent of testing recipes and not finding mistakes and
Right.
professionalism, and that counts too.
Jonathan, sort of a quick answer. How do you approach a cookbook? I mean, you're in the business.
I'm in the business, and so I get through a lot of cookbooks. I don't have time to read them from beginning to end.
Okay.
Some authors offer more than other authors. Their writing is a lot better than others. The books that I read from, well, at least a big part of the introduction and of the book are books that the cuisine is, I don't know anything about, and I know that they've really have dived deep into the history, the traditions, and the ingredients. So, like, for example, just recently a book came out. Her name is Carolyn Eden, and this is her second book. She wrote a book called Red Sands, and it's all about Central Asia, mostly about food from like Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan. So this really interests me because of where these countries border, and it's kind of like fusion food, but it's authentic. And I know nothing about that type of food, so I'm going to read from the beginning and learn about how this food came together. Also, I tend to read more about like the blurbs before the recipe to put the recipe into context.
Right.
And it makes me want to cook it more, or makes me understand it more. So I end up reading more the bits before the recipe, because you get a real good flavor of the recipe and bits of the book and what she's trying to say.
Lesley taught me the word for that in the pre-interview, head notes. So before you get to the recipe, the head notes. Another super quick, but then I want to go to like ask about learning about cooking, like from school, because what you learned from officially learned. But how about just a super fast one? We go 1, 2, 3 again, unless you have no comment. Are you the kind of cook who cleans while you're making the recipe, or do you cook at the end? Just which one, like a one word. Jonathan, what are you?
Oh, as I go.
As you go, you cook. Good. Lesley?
I have to say I'm both. When I cook at home, I'm good at cleaning up as I go. But when I was a chef, I was a terrible not cleaner upper. Under stressful moments, it's hard to clean up as you go.
Right. Shane?
What was the question again?
Do you clean up while you cook, or do you wait till the end?
I wait till the end. I'm a mess.
I thought we were getting along, Shane, so well, but I'm very sad to hear that. Shane, maybe we go back to Shane again. This is where I want to ask a bit about cooking school, because you've all been to cooking school, but Shane, I want to change your question a bit, because I believe that you cooked and learned about cooking, apart from your cooking school experience, in 5 different Indigenous communities. Or whatever you want to tell me about or tell us about, do you want to tell us about what you learned from life in those communities?
Okay, so I'll make this quick. I'll say that I worked in about.
Make this part quick. Make this part long. This is it.
I've worked in about 15 different Indigenous communities. So I've worked from the Kainai, the Piikani. I've worked in the Métis settlements here. I've worked up north in the Yukon. I've worked in Prince Rupert. I worked in Kincollet, all over. So the thing is, this is what people don't realize, and this is the question that people always assume, is because I'm Cree, because I'm Plains Cree, we're the same as a Mountain Cree. We're all the same. That's not it. If you're French, if you're Quebecois, if you're from Italy, of course everyone's different, right? So the touchstones of information is the touchstones of this land. The frequencies of the land are affected by the people of us. We affect the frequencies of the land. And I don't want to get to the politics of all that, from oil to this and that, but we do as humans affect the frequencies of the land, from our mental state, from the choices that we make, etc., etc. So when you go to these lands, the one thing I learned was, I think I told you, the Blackfoot tribe from standoff It doesn't matter if you guys know what I mean. It really doesn't. The
We can
Blackfoot
look it up
tribe is,
afterwards.
yeah, they're Treaty 6, we're Treaty 7. So I'm Treaty 7, I'm Treaty 6, Treaty 7, and south of us, right? We used to be we used to be at war all the time. We're pretty close now, but we're talking about the blood tribe. If you were to cook for an elder from the blood tribe and ask him, and just start talking, or you're having this discussion, and there's somebody from the blood tribe in this conversation, there's a big chance he or she's not going to say a whole lot. And the reason being is the elders believe you do not speak unless it's worth something that's honest to the conversation. They don't exaggerate, they don't lie, and they'll only say what's it's usually only a few words to the story or the answer or whatever. It's like a talking stick. These things are called, this is not a talking stick, this is a pen. But in conversations with some of these nations, the person with the talking stick is the only person that's allowed to speak. That way that person gets what they get to say, then the talking stick goes to the next person, the next person, the next person. I've been to Sweat. It's crazy what I've seen out there. I'll tell you something else that's very interesting. And you guys, I hope you find this interesting. Did you know that the town of Prince Rupert have a law? They have a law that you cannot kill the Sasquatch. No, but the thing is, I heard that snicker. Now, this is the thing. For a guy like me, I love hearing those stories because they truly, if you go to Prince Rupert, it is so far in the forest. It is so far out there. Who knows? But they all believe in the Sasquatch. They do. And I was shocked. I was totally shocked.
Sorry,
What?
I'm sorry.
You
were shocked. Okay, I was jumping in. What's the coolest thing you learned? Like, you were in so many different communities. If there's one, and let's make it about food or cooking, mind you, whatever you want.
Yeah, food. So the coolest thing oh man, this is a good one. So I was in Kincollet, and so Kincollet is 4 hours from the closest town to get food. So when I was looking around I was walking around this town on that specific documentary I was on, and I was asking the people there, I'm like, what happens if you run out of food? Like, what happens if somebody gets sick? What happens if somebody needs to go to the hospital? Food though, like what do you do when you run out? And so this is what they said. Right over there's an inlet. We eat from the waters. We eat all those seals, we eat. So the coolest thing I learned, and this is going to sound a bit strange, is how to shoot a seal. So he shot the seal, we brought it back, we cleaned the whole thing, and we ate it. But it's the process of, and maybe this is not quite answering your question, but you did ask about these nations. So what you got to do is you got to shoot it, and before you got to wait till it goes for a big gulp of air, and then shoot it then, because if it gets the air, it'll sink. So you got to shoot it right before it tries to gulp air, shoot it, hook it, and then you got the seal. Wow. That's nuts.
I don't know how my other two panelists are going to beat that, but in my notes, Jonathan, you had told me about somebody who had been a very important influence. And what I loved about him was his name. And his name was Pickler. Hard Pickler. Just like I love the cat's name Gravy. So are you okay to tell us about, because I found, tell us about, he was a real mentor, I believe, to you, or someone who influenced you. What would you say?
For sure. When I went to cooking school, and just like Shane, I actually dropped out earlier. And the reason I dropped out was because this apprenticeship came up. And so I took this apprenticeship at this small French bistro restaurant in Vancouver. And the owner and chef was this Austrian guy named Gerhard Pickler. If that's not Austrian, I don't know what is. And he's been around Vancouver for a long time. He was actually the executive chef of Hotel Vancouver for many years in the 80s. And there's a lot of Austrian and German chefs migrated to Vancouver because of the skiing, actually, the outdoor sports. They all moved there. So all my instructors at school were German or Austrian. And the first chef I worked under, Austrian. And yeah, he was the first chef that really inspired me and taught me how to be a cook. Because growing up in the restaurant business, I never was really exposed to working. I would, use the gun to shoot soda into a glass, and work the dishwasher a bit. But I never cooked in the restaurants because I was too young. So the first actual cooking professionally was when I went to cooking school, and then at this apprenticeship. And yeah, he was like the traditional chef that like commanded your attention, and he didn't take any shit from anybody. He was tough, but at the same time, he was a really like gentle, kind man. But and I think at this point in his career, his yelling days were over. But he didn't really need to yell. He had just that look that if you did something wrong, you knew that you did it wrong. And but the one takeaway from working at this place was how Gerhard really taught us how to act like cooks, and how to represent the trade of cooking, and how you need to look the part inside work and outside of work. So he really taught me the traditions of the cooking world and how you carry yourself. And so I always, throughout my career, I've always had a great respect for the trade of cooking, and tried to be as disciplined as possible when it came to working in the kitchen and working with other people, and how just to present yourself when you're around other chefs and working in other kitchens in just a really professional manner, where a lot of that I believe is lost. Like those traditional ways of living and representing the trade inside work and outside of work. I don't know. I find a lot of people don't follow that, but I take it to heart, and how I dress and talk to people outside of work is how I talk to them inside work. And so this was one of the biggest takeaways in my life. He was at the end of his career, so learning like techniques, and yeah, I got a few really great recipes from that place, but it was more of learning or getting taught how to have the right attitude when it comes to cooking.
And Lesley, what about you? Any like a lesson either from, you were a pastry chef, so from those days, from training, is there some like a pivotal moment lesson?
Well, I went to cooking school for 3 years. So I did the pastry program here at the Institut de Hôtellerie et Tourisme du Québec. And I did 2 years of pastry, and so pâtisserie, boulangerie, pastry and baking, and then a 3rd year course on chocolate, ice cream, and candy. And I did that course while I worked. So I was at cooking school for 3 years, and I have a lot of people talk to me about cooking school, but I am all for cooking school because it was an amazing place to see a wide array of things that I didn't see later on at work. That I just, the other couple of days ago, I candied some orange peels. I haven't done that since school, but because I never had to do it at work, because nobody candies orange peels anymore, they buy them. It's very rare, especially when I worked as a pastry chef, where in the 80s, everybody bought everything. They bought chocolate sauce and it came in a bucket, okay? Even in France. So it's an amazing opportunity to explore a lot of things, to mess up, to start to get yelled at, because you'll be yelled at later on when you get into a real kitchen, but at least you're walking in with a little bit of knowledge. Some chefs say it's better not to go to cooking school. I disagree, because I think if you learn on site, you're learning what they teach you. You learn things at cooking school that aren't good either, but And for me, I had a great mentor in cooking school. I would say in my whole career, I'd say I had one mentor, which is, and you know, even the word mentor is very debatable. What is a mentor? You know, is it somebody who helps you in your career, or is it somebody who maybe took advantage of you and it helped you, but you helped them a lot too, you know? So mentor is a dodgy term for me, but I really did have one teacher, a man called Jean-Paul Grappe, and he sent me to France. Now, when I did my second year of, I did a cooking course with him. And at the end of the cooking course, he said, what are you going to do this summer for your stage? So everybody who learns to cook, especially if you go to cooking school, you go on stages. It's like, in English, it's called work study, or they say stage. But so you have to go somewhere for several months. We had to go on stage. And I said I was going to go to the Banff Springs Hotel because all of my friends were going to the Banff Springs Hotel. They were all working as chambermaids. But I said, I'll go work in the pastry department. There was a big demand also from my school to go and work there. And he said, why don't you go to France? And it had never even occurred to me, because France was like, whoa, you know, France was serious gastronomy. And he sent me to France twice. And then I went the first year to work in Lyon, and the second year I went to work in the south of France for a famous pastry chef. And if there's one thing I learned, and I learned this from another chef later on, I learned not to think small. In the cooking world, you can go quite far if you're ambitious, because there is competition, but there are a lot of spots and there are a lot of opportunities. So there's a ton. I'm saying to my kids, go to cooking school before you go to university, just because there's so much training, but it opens up a million doors. There are a lot of different professions. They're not all very well paying. But for me, it's because I didn't even think I could go to France, and I did very well. So I would say to everybody, stop thinking so small.
Wow.
Think big. And then years later, I interviewed a very famous chef by the name of Morimoto. And Morimoto is one of the most famous chefs. He was one of the original Iron Chefs. Well, the second round for people who are obsessed with Iron Chef. And he is a brilliant man. And I interviewed him, and he is there's no adjectives when he talks to you. It is like so straight-laced. And at the end, I said, do you have any advice for young chefs? And I'm sure a ton of young chefs would love advice from Morimoto. And he said the opposite of what I said. He said, don't think big. He said, think medium and work your way up. And that is the best piece of advice I've ever heard in cooking. If you think too big, you're kind of in trouble, because you have to learn. You can't just start at the top. Forget it. You know, you really have to learn in cooking. But if you think small, you're wasting all the opportunities that are open to cooks, because you can travel the world as a chef. Maybe not now, but so think like Morimoto, think medium and work your way up. So that's really what I would, it's great.
What about Shane and Jonathan? Do you both feel like cooking school, like we say in French, ça vaut la peine? Was it worth it? Did you learn enough at cooking school? Would you tell someone, you know, dreaming of life as a chef, would you say absolutely? Lesley saying absolutely.
Shane, go for it.
I was a farm kid, right? So you got to remember, I was not used to a big city, and I was not just a farm kid. I was from nowhere, from absolutely nowhere. Like the closest town was probably 300 people. So for me to go from there to Calgary and Edmonton, it was very scary for me. But I felt it was necessary. That's what I wanted to do. And I take nothing back. My first year of culinary school was not good. I did not do well. I was too nervous. I thought I was a good cook. Here, that's another thing. I thought I was a good cook working with all these restaurants before I went to culinary school, which I was the age of 19. And I was totally out of my element. I didn't work. All these other young kids are working in these hotels. I just come from a truck stop place, and it was actually 3 truck stops. That's all I worked in. And I thought I was good there. And I went to culinary school, and in first year I was so nervous. I was just like, I don't know if I can get through this, and I did. And then I went back to my second year, got through that. Third year, blew third year away out of the water. So I will never say do not go to school. I think that's a mistake. If you choose not to, as we all, I mean, I've got friends all over the place. I mean, I know more. You know, it's funny. My hero. I only have one. Not even a hero. One mentor is Susher Lee, because we are good friends. And he's the only person I really looked up to at the beginning. Because remember, we were all somewhat the same age, but there was no internet, right? So I don't even remember how the hell we even learned anything, to be honest. But yeah, if you don't go to culinary school, then you're missing out. You're not only missing out on education, you're missing out on connections, you're missing out on the instructors, you're missing out on what they have to say and give you, whether it's wrong later on in life. It doesn't matter at the time. You know, I remember when I was in culinary school, I said, why do I have to make a chicken cordon bleu the same way as everybody else? Why can't we just have our follow the ingredients, follow the recipe, but change it? They're like, follow the recipe. This is why you're here. And then it was kind of a slap to the face, knowing that I gotta shut my mouth and just kind of focus and finish school. And then later on in life, when I get better, it's worth it. And I think I implore people to do it. I don't force them to. All my students, when I was in restaurants, all these restaurants I've worked at, I say, if you choose to not go to culinary school, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to force you to, but I'm telling you, you're making a mistake. If you don't go, you're missing out on not only education, but everything else, the community, the school, the studies, the smells of the hallways, the books. Go to school.
Great. I think, Jonathan, maybe because apparently we're watching our time, I'm going to switch it over to cookbooks now. Like, what's going on with cookbooks? Is there hope for cookbooks? I think you're all going to say yes, but like, so many people are reading on the internet. So what makes cookbooks special? And maybe we could also talk a little bit about the future. What's coming in cookbooks? Are there trends? And I have one more question. So I don't know how close we're running to the end of time, but maybe a couple of comments about cookbooks. And then I want to get in my last question too. Okay, so Jonathan, something about you're the expert, cookbook store. What's going on?
Well, there's a lot going on, and it continues to go on year after year after year. I'm actually really amazed at how much stuff comes out and how people can keep coming up with new things to write about. Now, the new things to write about part is like doesn't happen as much, but it does happen every season. I'm happy to see like the Middle Eastern kind of thing kind of die off to go into other styles of cooking. But lately I've been really excited about books that have been coming out on cuisines that haven't been really written about, or people haven't been exposed to, more regional stuff. Like back to this Persian thing, like Persian Middle Eastern cooking was really big thanks to Otto Lengi, and he kind of introduced it to the world. But it's kind of like that, just kind of the generic Persian cooking. Whereas now you start to see a lot more regional stuff, regional cookbooks throughout the Middle East, which I find super interesting, because every country, and not only that, but every region in every country has a different style of cooking, and they're very different from the region next to it. So I find that super interesting. So lately I've been talking about this book. It's called, I just happen to have it. It's called Parwana. It's about Afghan cooking, and you don't really see anything written about Afghan cooking. So I find this extremely interesting, and I only see this coming out more and more in the last couple of years. Regional or more undiscovered cuisine.
So it's like cookbooks are teaching us about more than cooking. We're talking about learning about the world. What about
100%?
Maybe Lesley, I could get a fairly quick comment because I'm watching the clock now. But you published. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about publishing your cookbook in French. I know you're completely bilingual. You work in both languages, but as a member of the Anglo community, you're like ours. What are you doing with the French book? So explain that to us.
Well, for me, I thought it was essential to, first of all, have a book that would be to my local audience. And since I do both English and French media, I was afraid that if I did an English book first, it would be very hard to get it translated into French. Now I'm working on getting the French book translated into English, which has not been easy, but I've got some leads. Because the thing is, like, Jonathan's talking about books that are very centered on international cuisines. And for somebody like me who's been a journalist for a long time and a chef and many different things, as a cooking teacher, I'm not in, you know, there's something very interesting that's happening is this whole idea of cultural appropriation, which is a huge topic in the cookbook world.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know years ago, my ex-husband worked with a chef who started writing about First Nations cooking, and he was from France, and it had to do with like creme brulee with chicoute in it. And I really think that we have to be very, very careful to, I don't want to say stick to what we know, but you know, there are great authors like Naomi Duguid who go off to a country like Burma, and she'll write a book about, you know, Burmese cuisine when, you know, there's not a lot coming out of Burma. So it's super fascinating. So when I want to write a book, my editor wanted to focus on me, which is not what I wanted to do. But I don't want to be Lesley Chesterman going to Mexico to write a Mexican cookbook, because you know, people in Mexico should write that cookbook, and Rick Bayless is writing that cookbook, and he's doing it very well and getting a lot of heat for it. So these days, if you want to write a cookbook, you have to be really careful about what road you're going to go down.
Right. Wow.
Because you have to be an expert on what you write about to write a good cookbook. So I just decided to focus on the food that I make that's good, and to focus on rejuvenating a lot of recipes a lot of people kind of think are dead, maybe with new techniques. Also, there's a whole education element to cooking that I think is very important that a lot of people don't know. So a lot of people might be using the Ottolenghi cookbook and putting their tomatoes in the fridge. You know, so like the cooking is such a broad world that if you want to write a cookbook that's relevant, that sells, right? You don't want to sell 5,000 copies, you want to sell a lot more, or, you know, 1,000 copies. You want to write a book that people are going to use, because it's nice to write about a lot of topics, but you also want that book to be full of splatters and being used.
Right.
And I just think there's, as having been a journalist, I still think there's a huge education component. And with every generation that comes up, they have to learn, because it's fun to watch YouTube videos, but there are a lot of basics that people don't know. And cooking shows are really now axed on competitions, not enough on how to wash the lettuce, you know? Right. So I think that's hugely important.
I think
that's a great point that Lesley was saying about how books are there for education. I'm going to be honest. I've learned the most about cooking out of cookbooks, and I search out books that are not that like kind of generic, say Chinese, generic Mexican, those generic Middle Eastern cookbooks, because they don't offer you really anything. If you've never cooked that food before, it's really great. Like there's an audience for that, but like I think we're kind of beyond that. And this is what's really, really great about Shane's cookbook, is that he has introduced and written about a type of cuisine that is so steeped in history and tradition that does not get a lot of it's not out there. Like there's not a lot written about it. There's not a lot of books like that out there, if any. And so this is what I find super interesting. And I really applaud authors to like kind of get out there and write about what they know, and especially write about stuff that is just like, it's just not out there. I want to see a good Hungarian cookbook. There are no good Hungarian cookbooks out there.
I know a few Hungarians I could mention to them. Before we do the wrap up, I'm not letting it wrap up yet. Lesley gave us a tip. I mean, I knew it because I'm sophisticated. Don't put your tomatoes in the fridge. How about you guys? Can you give us like a 2-second each, any quick tip that comes to mind? Just because viewers, maybe they didn't know the tomato thing. My boyfriend occasionally puts a tomato in the fridge.
My sister still does in Paris.
What about you guys? Anything quick, like a fast thing, a do or don't do?
Yeah, I don't put anything into a pan until it's hot.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Except for a duck breast, you can start.
Oh, I put it in when it's kind of warmish, like medium heat. But yeah, like a lot of people will put food into cold pans, and it frustrates me.
Yeah.
Jane, have you got something? Have you got a quick one for us, or you're waiting for a deeper question?
Well, I mean, that's just, I mean, yeah, I could say anything about that. I mean, does it got to be about food or just kitchen in general? Because I'm going to tell you this, I'll say this little off topic here. If you're going to cook at home, even though this is not a food tip, good cutting board, same old story, sharp knives, same old story, give yourself same old story. You'll love fucking cooking. Oops, I swore.
Okay, wait, I'm not letting it end yet, even if they're writing me notes. It's almost over. I want to know, Shane said this, but we have to do it quickly. Why do you cook? He said, that's the question, right? So Shane, in like, because they're telling me like we have to wrap it up. So can you say in a minute or two, why do you cook? And I'd like to ask the other two, and then I guess I will wrap it up then.
Okay, the reason I cook is because it makes people happy. I can make them, like I said earlier, I can affect their emotions. It challenges me a lot. I love to be challenged. And going back to the TV stuff and the Food Network stuff, of course, you guys know I've been on a lot of those shows. The reason I did it was because I wanted to challenge myself and check off that square. That's why.
You want it to be the best. What about you, Lesley? Why do you cook?
For me, it's absolutely my therapy. I cook when I'm happy. I especially cook when I'm sad or depressed. It's my chance to be creative. Since art class in grade school, I haven't had the chance. I love being creative. It's immensely challenging and you never stop learning.
Yeah.
And that's why a great advice to people to cook is to never give up. Is to don't be discouraged easily. It is a long path to become a good cook. And it is so rewarding. And not only is it rewarding to yourself, but as Shane said, to share with everybody at the table. It's fantastic.
And Jonathan, thank you for that. Jonathan?
Yeah, I think we all like to cook to put a smile on other people's faces. That's certainly why I cook. I also like to learn about different cuisines. So I do cook a lot. I do take the leap and cook way out of my comfort zone on a consistent basis. So it's also about the process for me. I really enjoy the process of it over the actual eating part of it. So creating something from raw ingredient to a finished plate, I find very rewarding.
Great.
Yeah.
One more super fast before the wrap up. This is like a 2-word answer. What are you working on? Like a recipe you're trying to, like something you want to, you're interested in, you're exploring. Like we've got a duck. The first time I'm making duck tonight. What's cooking, or what do you want to cook? Lesley, something you want to explore, you want to get better at?
This week, I'm going to start making homemade chocolate bars because everybody was making sourdough bread and all kinds of stuff. So I decided it's time I start making my own chocolate bars instead of buying them. So I'm making chocolate bars.
I didn't know that was possible. What about you, Shane? What do you want to explore? What's on the horizon?
I don't normally cook this style food. I love eating it, but I know nothing about it. So I want to perfect biryani.
Oh, cool. And Jonathan?
Well, I was showing it earlier. I am diving into Afghan food because I find it super interesting. I've never cooked this type of food before. And this book just kind of screams cook from me. Right. So this is this one, and it was this Xi'an famous foods book that I'm a huge fan of. It's a restaurant or a bunch of restaurants in most notably in Manhattan, but the Central Western Chinese cuisine, super spicy hand-pulled noodles. This stuff, these are the two things I'm jumping into.
Okay, interesting. Well, I'm sure like me, I'm starving now. I knew that might happen, but you guys made me really, really hungry. The chocolate bars are especially with me. Shane taught me something, and I thought it would be a nice way to end. But I have to give him credit because I didn't think of it. But he told me that there's correct me if my pronunciation, a Kenai custom, Shane, is that, or a Kenai, like a way of thinking? Did I say it? Okay. And that is, he said, we're never going to have this conversation again in our lives. The conversation we just had, we'll never have it again. And it was special. I don't know. I feel very lucky. I got to listen to all you guys and be in your company, and I didn't even have to cook or wash dishes for you. Maybe in the future. Okay. Thank you all very, very, very much. Thanks to Blue Met, and I guess we just keep cooking and showing people that we love them. We got to cook for them. Bye, everybody. Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.